Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. I'm here again with another special guest, somebody that I met through the language networking. I think it's really good to keep meeting new people, and I've really been enjoying the language networking sessions that we've had for language professionals. And so maybe you'd like to start by telling us who you are, what you do, and why you are interested in languages.
Sure, of course. And first, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here on your podcast. So I'm Sion Dayson. I'm an American voice actor based in Valencia, Spain. I specialize in voicing e-learning, corporate videos, ELT materials, and audio description. And I've also narrated over 140 titles for Blinkist, which is an app that summarizes best-selling books. And I'm the monthly presenter for Business Spotlight Audio, which is an English language trainer for German students learning English. So I get to work on a lot of different projects from my home studio, and I absolutely love it. So I would say, when I first saw the event for language professionals, I was sort of like, am I a language professional? But I was like, well, I work with language all day. I analyze and interpret scripts. And of course, I'm an American living in Spain, and I also lived in France for 10 years. So I've spent more of my adult life living in countries where English isn't spoken. So it's just, a real part of my life that I have these three languages. And it's been really great to meet people through your events.
Yeah, I like to keep that term quite broad, because am I a language professional? I don't know, but it's my event, so I can I can say that I am. And generally, we get a lot of translators, interpreters coming to the language events. But I think it's really good to meet other people as well, to find out about different types of work and voice acting and narration and audio description. I think it's really good and useful to learn about what other people are doing. And also I've used some of those spotlight materials with my learners. So that's cool to find someone.
That's so cool. I've been doing that since last year. Have you heard me introduce some of the pieces?
I've seen some of the ones that you've posted talking about. So I haven't used any in the last year, but it is a resource that I like to go to, and it's something that I recommend for either in language classes or people learning independently. They're good resources, and they have different topics, interesting topics, because sometimes I think, you think, oh, business English, it's going to be really dull, right? Because some of the books are really dull or really kind of irrelevant to modern day business English. And I think that's something that Spotlight does really well, in that they are topics that are relevant and up to date and interesting. They make you think, which is always good.
Exactly. And I mean, business English, like, we're all working, right? Like, it doesn't have to be something that's boring. So yeah, just contemporary issues that we all face in our working life. Yeah, I totally agree.
And how so much of it is not just working life. Work life doesn't stop when you leave the office, does it? It's how we interact with others in relation to work. It's how work affects our own well-being. It's that there are many things that we can discuss if we talk about, business life or work.
Yeah, of course. And especially, I think we're both self-employed, right? So in a way, like, trying to find those boundaries between work and life can be hard, because for me, I could work forever because
if you enjoy it. It doesn't feel like work, but then at some point you say, no, I need some time. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to do something that's just for me.
Exactly.
So you've been living in Spain for a while now. So what is your how has your journey with languages been? Did you learn Spanish before you went there, or did you learn German first, or what's the story with you in languages?
Yeah, so I learned Spanish when I was a little kid. In fact, my first babysitter when I was a baby was from the Dominican Republic. And I wasn't speaking at that time, but I think the fact that I was hearing Spanish at such like an important developmental stage
Mm.
really sort of created a special bond with the language. And in the US, I started studying Spanish from the time I was in kindergarten.
Oh,
So,
wow, that's really
um,
cool that you started so young.
but I wouldn't say it was study. Like it was, games and music and play. And it didn't, honestly, I think language learning should still feel like that. And so I studied Spanish all the way up through graduation. And then when I went to university, I spent a summer in Mexico or semester in Mexico in Guadalajara. But then I just sort of stopped using it. I moved to New York, which was wonderful. Like every language in the world is spoken there, which is one of the things I love about New York. But I just didn't use it. And then I moved to Paris. And that started a whole nother language journey because I had no background in French. So I was learning French from scratch, which is very different learning a language as an adult than it was as a little
Mm.
kid. And because I was so immersed in that, I wasn't keeping my Spanish up. So by the time I came to Spain, it had been over 20 years since I had really used Spanish day to day. And little tip, if you don't use a language, you start losing it.
Yeah, you'll
So
forget everything you learned.
you'll forget everything.
It's there, but it's not there when you need it. It doesn't come to the surface quickly enough when you want to say something.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, I sort of had to restart. I mean, not from scratch, because as you said, like it was still somewhere inside of me, but it wasn't coming as easily as it was when I was a little kid. So I still have to work at it every day. Um, and yeah, so that's sort of the story of my French and Spanish.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you've got a couple of things going on there. You've got the fact that you can get rusty, you can forget a language if you don't use it regularly. You've also got the fact that, you mentioned it's different learning as an adult, because I have a similar story that I learned German, or I started to learn German at school. You never really finish learning a language, do you? But with Romanian and Portuguese, they are as adults. And I think that brings new opportunities because you can really customize the learning, but it also brings challenges because you want to feel articulate and you're not at the beginning. So it's really a lot of fun, and that's why I do it. But at the same time, it is a different experience from learning at school. But I think when you go to live in another country, which I have never done, I would like to someday, but I haven't done it. But I imagine that everything you learned at school, you realize most of it isn't so relevant for day-to-day living and working in another country. So you still need to add to that vocabulary that you learned, even if you got your language skills to a fairly decent level.
Oh, for sure. And when I moved to Paris, I had literally only had a 5-week French course. So I didn't even have that much of a basis. I mean, it was an intensive course. It was, 3 hours every day, but that's not enough to then launch in. So I learned almost everything on the ground. And that definitely has its pros and its cons, but I think it's more in the pro category because like I had no choice. And one of, the reason I moved there was very much a romantic whim. I was working in New York, but I was in Paris just for the weekend for a conference that we had, and I just fell in love with the city, which shouldn't sound so surprising because so many people love Paris, but that actually wasn't my case. Like, I wasn't a Francophile. Like, I had no illusions of I didn't have an Eiffel Tower poster in my room. But I really was like, wow, this is a really beautiful city. And so I planned a month vacation a few months after that, and then I fell in love with a dashing Frenchman. So classic, so cliche. But so I moved there for love, and that's a very
Oh,
big motivation to learn. And he did not speak English. So
that's also a big motivation.
exactly. So I had this partner who didn't speak English, and then I was teaching Pilates at the studio in French like my entire life.
Wow.
just suddenly was in French. So there's no choice but to learn it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think some of my teacher friends, not so much for English, because a lot of people want English for business, but some of the other languages. I don't teach other languages, but my friends do, and they say that it's either for the partner or for the partner's family, or that can be a really big motivator, which as a teacher is great as long as the relationship keeps going well.
Right.
But I guess like sometimes people will fall in love with the place as well, or the culture, or the language, and even if the relationship doesn't last, then maybe another one will come along. So you never know, but it's certainly a big motivator, more so than some people who have to learn for work. I think I do a lot of work with freelancers and business owners, so that they are very motivated because it's their business. But if someone just says, oh, you should learn English because we're going to make it our company language, that's not the same motivation as wanting to speak to your partner. So
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it's sort of funny you say that because luckily I did fall in love with the city first because I'm no longer with that French partner, but it was like I had other reasons to be there, but it was a great motivator. But I taught English here in Spain for a little while, and they have a requirement that I think any teacher in the public system has to have a B2 level of English. So most of my students were just learning because they had to fulfill that requirement, but they weren't actually interested in the language.
yeah,
Yeah, you
that's
can
hard.
definitely feel the difference between someone who's really curious and wants to learn the language and someone who's just like, check the, tick this off the box because I have to.
Yeah, or for like people who've moved to another country and they want citizenship, and part of it is, I think it's only like A2. It's not even a really high requirement, but I know some people who are teachers that they say that the students stop after A2 because they've got their citizenship, they've done what they need to, and I think it takes a lot more to teach those kinds of classes, because I know it's a lot more rewarding when you're working with people who really want to learn. I don't think it depends how easy they find that. I'm not talking about ability, but I'm talking about the motivation for being there, and what that language is going to be used for afterwards.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that intrinsic motivation is incredibly important.
And so you stopped. What made you decide to take a career change, like to take a different path, and to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, it was actually thanks to teaching English. So I was teaching English at a university here in Spain, and we were recording some scripts for our students. The university had an official exam, and a sound engineer was overseeing the process. And when I was recording my scripts, he asked if I was a professional voice actor because I was so good at it. And I was like, no, but that sounds amazing.
That's an idea.
Yeah, and really that one question just lit me up. And I'm someone who like I'm very intuitive, and if I have that sort of spark, I will follow it. And so I just started researching voiceover and just like dove totally into it. And so this was at the end of 2019. And so by the time COVID came around in 2020, Spain had a very strict confinement. Like we couldn't even leave our house to go for a walk. I was like, well, this is a perfect time to just, go all in on this project. So, I started building a home studio. I started doing coaching, taking improv classes, doing all of these things, teaching myself sound editing. And I'm a pandemic pivot person.
I
I
think lots of people are, aren't
my
they? But
career, yeah.
it's a prime time for learning. I mean, I didn't pivot during the pandemic, but I certainly learned a lot. That was when my Romanian project started, and I thought, I want to learn something. I want to do something good with all this free time. But I think for a lot of people, it was an opportunity to make something. Nobody really enjoyed the fact that we all had to stay in, but like it's up to you what you do with that additional free time that you have, unless you can't because you have caring responsibilities. I don't mean in that way, but I mean if you have time that's yours to do with whatever you want, then it's up to you whether you use it for something that will be beneficial for you in the future.
Exactly. I mean, it totally saved me, like having this new project that I was really excited about. Like I was genuinely excited to wake up every day and learn something new. So So yeah, I mean, obviously it's not an ideal situation to be in your house 24/7, but I made really good use of it.
Yeah, and so this whole new business was born. And did the audio description come at the same time, or is that a more recent addition to what you're doing?
It's more recent. Yeah. I mean, that's the amazing thing about voiceover is that there's so many different genres and the longer I'm in the industry, the more I learn about it. So I didn't know about audio description when I started my voiceover career. I think it was just about 2 years ago. I saw a post on LinkedIn. It was a job ad. Hearsay Audio Description Agency was looking for new voices to do audio description. And I was like, wow, I don't even know what that is. And so I
Mhm.
started researching it and it was really interesting. And I sent in my materials and I was selected for the roster. So then I got training and I was like, wow, I really, really love this niche because, arts and culture have been so important in my life and I want to make it accessible to everybody. So yeah, I work just in the audio visual realm of audio description, but I know audio describers who go to live performances and describe those dance performances. It's really cool. It's a really cool area.
And it makes a difference. Speaking as a user, it makes a real difference between whether someone has access to that material that they are unable to see, whether they can understand what's going on, whether they can enjoy the content with their friends or alone, without having to rely on somebody to describe the more visual parts. I think it's not enough is known about it really, but when it is available, it does make a lot of difference. So do you write the text as well, or are you given the text and then you voice it? How does it work?
Yeah, so far I've only voiced audio description, but I recently did a training, the Audio Description Institute run by the American Council of the Blind, that we also had to write scripts as part of our training.
Mm.
And so I am slowly investigating that. I mean, I actually have a background as a writer in other realms as well, so it sort of makes sense to put them together. But it sort of depends on the country. I mean, I think in the UK, it's people do both. They write it and voice it, but in the
Okay.
US, it's more separate. They're separate realms. You write the script and someone else voices it. So far, I'm more of an audio description narrator.
That's interesting. I think if you have the skills, then why not combine them? But I can imagine that there will be some people who will be terrible writers, but good at the narration and the other way around. So I guess it's good that there's opportunity for both. And that doesn't really have much to do with language, but I wanted to know the answer, and it's my podcast, so we're going to go
Exactly.
there.
You can ask whatever you want.
But in terms of language, I know that the work that you do professionally is in English. But how much of a role does Spanish play in your day-to-day life, socially? Is it the language that you use most often, or do you use another language at home, or how important is Spanish for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it were more present in my daily life. I mean, it's crazy. I live in Spain, but because I work in English and I work at home, the
Mm.
majority of my day is in English. So that's why I say I have to stay consistent with my Spanish studies. I have to make myself still, listen to the podcast, watch the shows in Spanish and participate out in the world, with Spanish speakers, with locals. As far as work goes, I do work only in English, but I have had some sessions where the client is a Spanish speaker, so they direct me in Spanish.
Okay.
I really love those sessions because, it allows the person to give me direction in the language they're most comfortable in.
Mm.
And I think they really appreciate that I can bring that skill set to the session.
Yeah, and I think that can really put people at ease as well. Like with my work, sometimes if I'm working with an HR department of a company, or if I'm working with somebody who wants to explain things before we get into the actual language training, if they have a challenge with something and they want to explain what that is and do that in German, then they feel better because they've said exactly what they wanted to say. And I feel good because I know exactly what the problem is. And that's sometimes easier if somebody doesn't feel comfortable doing that in English, then if you have other languages available, it can make it easier for the client relationship as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And um, the first time that happened, the session wasn't set up that way. They started off by speaking to me in English, but I could tell, they were a little hesitant about what they were
Mm.
saying. So I just, casually was like, I'm happy to speak Spanish if you would like. And they just sort of like lit up and they're like, okay. And the rest of the session was in Spanish. So yeah, it definitely can help smooth things over.
I've even had that at the airport when I've gone to Germany because I get passenger assistance, and so somebody came. I think it was like all the colleagues deciding who's gonna do this thing where they have to speak English, and then they came to me and I said, "Oh, I can speak German if you want." Really, that's okay. That's great. Let's speak German. So just the relief.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I don't know if I can ask you questions too, but what is your background with German? So you learned it when you were little, or?
Not little. It was my second additional language at school. So my first was French, and sorry to any French listeners, but we didn't fall in love, French and I. So I passed the exams. I did quite well in the exams, but I didn't want to continue with the language. I didn't have that same kind of feeling of connection with the language that I later did with German. And I've started a number of other languages, and a couple of them have fallen by the wayside. So I've got three now, but German was the second language, and I was so lucky because it wouldn't have been, I guess it wouldn't work nowadays because we only had 4 people in the German class, because there were only 4 people who wanted to do a second additional language at the exam stage. But it was available in my small school, the small town school. And I really enjoyed it. And so when I finished, I didn't study German, but I just enjoyed it. And I made a point of continuing to learn on my own, and then making friends in Germany and visiting them. And I always knew that somehow I wanted to have a role that also involved other languages. I thought it would just be German. As it's turned out, it's probably not. It's probably a couple more. And then the direction that I took, I was working in communications, but only in English. And there were no opportunities for me to use my other languages in those roles. So I just kept, doing it in my spare time, improving my skills. And then I wanted a career change. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I considered working for a German company, but a lot of the multilingual roles here were sales, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And then I thought, well, I'm teaching people in my spare time regularly because it's what I do. I had various language exchanges going on. I thought I could make a business out of this. I had the flu, and I was lying in bed thinking, oh, something needs to change with my life. I'm not happy with it. And I thought, okay, I could completely change. I could use my German. I could start marketing in German and give English lessons to adults. And then within a year, I'd left my other job and set up English with Kirsty. That was 10 years ago now.
Oh,
So
wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I didn't know that
yeah,
whole background. I really love that.
I think sometimes you don't know what you want to do when you're at the age where you're supposed to know what you want to do. So yeah, sometimes, and I think new jobs have appeared. We talk about, I know it's a bit of a controversial topic about, how technology is potentially taking some jobs. But for me, it went the other way, that being able to work online, which 10 years ago was a bit more unusual than it is now, meant that I could set up a business from home and work with people across Europe and teach them without having to rely on, people looking for English tuition in my town. Or it opened so many doors for me, because then I didn't spend so much time traveling around like some of my other teacher friends. I could do it all remotely, and it was the coming together of many things, like wanting to work with people, wanting to work with languages. So yeah, it was good when I finally understood how I could bring these things together that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally relate to that because, as I said, most of my adult life has been living abroad. And so
Mm,
it's been really great that I can live online and I don't have to depend on being completely bilingual in the country where I am, because I can still offer my services in English to people anywhere in the world who need.
mm. And have you found any challenges, either language related or cultural challenges or differences, things you've had to get used to? And if you have, what or who helped you to overcome those challenges?
I mean, I think there are always challenges when you're living in a different place, but they're of interest to me. I actually studied sociology and anthropology in university. So I'm interested in cultural differences and cultural norms and customs and just sort of, people have different perspectives and, oh, we do it this way, in this country, but that's not how it is in this other one. So I think just having a real curiosity about it and knowing that not everyone has the same perspective as you do. But
Mm.
yeah, I definitely had more challenges in Paris. It was funny. You were saying you didn't have much of a connection to French. I mean, I sort of feel the same in that I feel like I have different personalities in the different languages. And I like who I am more in Spanish than in French.
Okay.
And I think some of it has to do with the language itself. In French, even just like the structure of the language that, things are often cast in the negative. You don't say something is good, you say it's not bad, And so I
That's quite
sort of have
English, actually. We do that as well, like British English.
oh, right. That's true. I hadn't thought about that. Well, I'm
Yeah.
American, so everything's amazing and awesome. So I'm
That
more
must be quite hard. Actually, I just finished reading a book about an American woman who moved to Paris, and it was, I mean, it was describing in some detail all the social interaction she had and the challenges and how she loved the city but found it difficult to really feel at home there at the beginning, and to find friends and to fit in because of some of the cultural differences. And I mean, she got there in the end, but like some of her initial impressions of the city, it reminded me of that book when you were saying that,
oh
because
yeah.
it's a
I mean,
big culture shock, I imagine.
that was 100% my experience. And something that actually helped was I started a blog called Paris Imperfect. Like, it's like, let's dispel with some of like, Paris is so beautiful and sparkling lights on the Eiffel Towers. It's like, what is it like to actually live here day by day? And I had a series called Faux Pas Fridays, where like I would just sort of turn my mistakes into just sort of like humoristic fodder. And that is actually when things started to change because I had been having a really hard time adjusting to the culture. But once I sort of started reflecting on it and just sort of taking a more light-hearted approach to it and people started resonating with it, I was like, okay, all right, I can create my own little way through the world in this way. And just sharing is what helped the most.
And it's probably the realization that it's not just you. If people were resonating with it, they must have had some similar experiences and other stories to tell, like similar stories. And then you realize it's not just me, it's
Yeah,
everyone that comes
exactly.
here has some kind of similar experience, especially if you're from a culture where, I guess, where things are expressed a bit more differently or where people are a bit more open, and then you have to adapt.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think also in Paris, it was just people are a lot more reserved. And as you can probably
Mm.
hear, I laugh a lot. I'm very loud. Like I literally would have French people turn around and tell me to be quiet if I laugh too loud. And so it's like, okay, that's a bit of a killjoy.
Yeah.
And so when I moved to Spain, which is a much louder culture and like people are very expressive, I was like, oh right, okay, this feels more my vibe. So yeah, but I'm so grateful I had both experiences and I fit in enough that I acquired French nationality and I'm so grateful for that. That allows me to live in Europe anywhere I want to now. And yeah, I was there for a decade and I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was yeah, I'm happier now in Valencia, I will say.
Found where you fit in. And I think you can also, I mean, for you, it's finding something that's more aligned to how you are naturally. But I think for some of us from the more reserved cultures, when you start spending more time with people who don't behave like that, whether you're using your first language or another one, you can also discover new parts of yourself, which is fun, because it's okay to be like this. It's okay to be more open. It's okay to express your emotions more. That's actually quite liberating for someone from a culture where people don't really do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. That's so great. So which languages allow you to do that you feel more free and expressive?
I don't know about the languages. I think sometimes my Romanian friends are more expressive, as are my Portuguese friends, but I refuse to speak Portuguese with anyone apart from my teacher, who's being paid to listen to my terrible Portuguese at the moment. So I allow people to speak Portuguese with me, but I don't answer them yet. It's a thing that I need to get past. But looking at the cultures in, irrespective of which language is being spoken, I've noticed that speakers of both Portuguese and Romanian tend to be a bit more open and expressive, and sometimes wonder why you're not doing the same. Like, I was honest with you.
Oh, that's super interesting.
But yeah, it's a learning curve, but it's also fun to explore new parts of your personality in another language, because I think it's the same. Like German Kirsty and Romanian Kirsty are different, or German and Romanian speaking Kirsty. Portuguese speaking Kirsty hasn't really found her voice yet, but she will, and then she'll be different again. So
yeah,
I think the more languages you have, the more you can really learn about yourself too, which is important.
Yeah, that's so true. So I guess right now I have 3 different personalities. We'll see if I add more.
Yeah, I said I wasn't going to add any more, and then I did, but I'm stopping at 3 now. I'm that's enough. So do you have any advice for anyone who's thinking about relocating, or do you think, you should just go for it and things will fall into place? Or
I mean, I moved in my late 20s, so maybe I had more like just go out and do it than if I were older. But then I moved to Spain in my late 30s, so I also did a little later. Yeah, I mean, one of my mantras is do it scared. Like, even if you're nervous about something, just go for it. And I sort of remind myself that feeling anxiety and excitement are actually physiologically very similar in the body. So anytime I think like, oh, I'm really anxious about this, I reframe it in my mind to like, I'm really excited about this.
Yeah.
There's a reason, like my heart is beating faster. Like, I'm so excited about this. So it is a huge change to move to another country, but it's also so rewarding and incredible that, yeah, I would say just go for it. And, do try to remember who you are. So as far as learning languages, do the things you love doing anyway, but in that language. So I like doing yoga. So I go to a yoga class in Spanish. If you like doing art, go to an art class in the new language. Yeah, and just, lean on people for advice. Like every time I've moved, I've found other expat groups. Like I didn't move to another country to only hang out with expats, but it is nice to have people who understand your situation, that they've also come from another country and are navigating all of these new things at the same time. And they have good advice as well. So, yeah, exactly.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for this. I had some ideas, some questions I wanted to ask you, but we've covered other stuff as well. So that's really good. Where can people find you? Is LinkedIn the best place, or?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's how we know each other. So I'm Sion, Sion, Dayson, Dayson. And I also have my website, siondayson.com. So feel free to look me up.
And I'll add both of those links to our episode page so that people can click through and find you. Well, thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been great catching up with you. And yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.